Fiction writers, present company included, don't understand very much about what they do. Not why it works when it's good, not why it doesn't when it's bad. That caveat out of the way, let's talk about some ideas and inspiration about fiction writing that I've drawn from Stephen King's On Writing. There's a lot to unpack in this book. It's possibly one of the best known books on the writing of fiction out there today. It's been around since 2000, and if you don't know who Stephen King is, he wrote all of these, plus about 40 more books and counting, still writing today. Maybe the most successful author of the last century and a half, one of the most successful authors of all time. So I'm not going to go into his whole oeuvre, everything he's done. I used to be a big Stephen King fan, particularly in my teenage years. I read a lot of Stephen King. Somebody who's been that successful for that long with so many books has got to have something worthwhile to say on writing, and this is a really good book, I will say that. I have read this numerous times. This was actually one of the assigned texts in my first year of graduate school, my fiction class that I was taking there, and by that point, of course, I'd already read it many times. I've listened to the audiobook many times. I've taken notes on it. I've done quite a bit of work from this book, and I will say that there's lots of good things in here. He gives lots of great basic fundamental advice, great advice for writers starting out, great advice to remind more experienced writers to come back to a lot of their fundamentals. There are some things in here that don't really ring true to me. His advice on process, the way he approaches telling a story, feels like it's very unique to him, and it does work for some writers, certainly. Some other writers besides Stephen King can use this process, but I feel like a lot of newer writers who try to follow his process advice, particularly those who are not kind of geared towards the pantsing mentality, the just sit down and write by your seat of your pants mentality, are going to have a lot of trouble actually finishing work just by following his process. But a lot of the other advice that he gives in this book is top notch. And learning his story, understanding where he started, where he came from, he did not start at the top. He did not start with a silver spoon in his mouth. He did have talent from an early age, but he put a lot of work into it. He worked as a journalist in high school. He worked as an English teacher, like yours truly, later on in his life before he actually got his first book published and eventually blew up and became a success. But it was a long and difficult struggle for him. And of course, he battled against addiction, alcohol addiction, drug addiction, other problems like that along the way. And he details all of that in this book. Today, I am going to focus on just a few pieces of advice that he gives in the early part of the book, first 100 pages or so, where he's giving some inspiration that I feel like I really need right now. And maybe you guys could use it too. And I'll give you my takeaways as I share the particular quotes that have rung true to me. So here he is quoting his first editor, when he had a job at a newspaper while he was still in high school. "When you write a story, you're telling yourself the story," he said. "When you rewrite, your main job is taking out all the things that are not the story." It's a pretty good reminder. When you're first telling the story, you're telling the story to yourself. You need to make sure that you understand the story, what its general structure is, the main characters, the main conflict, all of that. You need to make sure that you understand that yourself before you can properly communicate it to someone else. So the first draft is the down draft of the story. You're just getting it down. He follows it up with, on the same page, the next piece of his editor's advice: "Write with the door closed, rewrite with the door open." This is a good reminder. Again, when you're writing your first draft, it's just for you. So write with the door closed. No one wants to write with somebody leaning over their shoulder anyway. Don't even imagine someone leaning over your shoulder. Don't even imagine your final audience when you're writing your first draft, because it's not for them. They're never going to see it. You don't want to share your first drafts. If you think too hard about sharing your first drafts, you are going to get stuck. That is where writer's block is going to come out and bite you. You need to get past that and say, this first draft is the garbage draft. You write for the garbage. You're just writing just to get something down, get the story down out of your head. Once you've got the story out of your head, once you finish that first draft, and that can be a big challenge, particularly if it's a longer project like a novel. Once you've got that draft done, though, that's when the real job of the writer comes into play. That's when you rewrite. You rewrite with the door open. That's when you start to think about your reader. Have I communicated this story well to the reader? Have I really given all the pieces in such a way that the reader is going to be able to put them together and not only understand the story, but be entertained and enlightened by it? Which means that in that second draft, once you're through with that second draft, you need to get eyes on that story. That second draft is for other people. You need to get somebody else to edit it, to look at it, to give you feedback on it, so that you know how to polish it up to make sure that it is ready for your final reading audience. His next piece of advice, which resonated a lot with me: writing is a lonely job. Having someone who believes in you makes a lot of difference. They don't have to make speeches. Just believing is usually enough. Of course, in this section, he is referring to his own wife, novelist Tabitha King, whom he met in college and has been married to ever since, a long time now. His wife has been that support for him, has been that anchor that has helped keep him moving through, even just by believing in his work without really having to do much else for him. She's the one who rescued his novel Carrie out of the wastebasket, told him, hey, you've got something here, and made him finish it. And of course, that is his first actual published novel, which made him the success that he is today. So he really does owe a good portion of his success to his spouse. I owe a lot of what I'm able to do to my wife right now. We've been married for 5 years, been together for 9. Now it's the second time around for both of us. And I have had partners in the past who were not as supportive or understanding of my creative endeavors. Well, you're not making money with that right now, so why are you spending time doing it? My wife right now is very supportive. She's also got an MFA in creative writing. Hers is in poetry, mine's in fiction. She's also an English teacher. She's an adjunct college professor, so she does that part-time. I'm a full-time high school AP and Lit teacher, as well as creative writing teacher. So we have a lot of these things in common, but she doesn't really proofread my work. I do read it to her occasionally, but just the fact that she knows if I'm out here just thinking about things, just sitting here like this, she knows I'm working. That is part of a writer's work, is to sit and be bored and let the ideas come to you. She understands the process that I'm going through. Just having someone understanding in your life can be very helpful. If you don't have a significant other, or your significant other is not that kind of understanding person for you, then you need to find your tribe, at least a couple people, to be there just to support you no matter what, through your process, to believe in your creative process. It's a good idea to find a writing community. It's part of why I went to graduate school in the first place. I was already a published author. I had actually already been hired as an English and creative writing teacher by the time I went there. So I didn't need to learn the basics of creative writing in my creative writing program. I went there in part to have somebody to encourage me to finish my work, because finishing work is always a challenge for writers, and in part to build a writing community, or to get in touch with a writing community, to talk with other writers and get inspired by just the fact that they were doing their own projects. We're all there. We were all writing different things. People were majoring in creative nonfiction and poetry and screenwriting and playwriting. And here I am writing fiction. And so there's all sorts of different angles that we're coming at things. But the fact that we were all there to support each other made a huge difference in me getting my novel finished when I was writing it. So find your tribe. Find someone who will support you. Next bit of advice is on the process itself. And these aren't the process notes I was complaining about at the first point. This part I completely agree with him on. Stopping a piece of work just because it's hard, either emotionally or imaginatively, is a bad idea. Sometimes you have to go on when you don't feel like it. And sometimes you're doing good work when it feels like all you're managing is to shovel shit from a sitting position. Very colorful way to put that, but I will say that what this does remind me to do is to finish my damn stories. Seriously, I have a pile of half-finished half-assery that could stretch to Pluto. I need to complete and revise some of that and put it out for publication, because it's been a while since I've done that. I need to get myself back in the habit of finishing my stories. It's very difficult to do when I have so much else going on, like sitting down, starting a project, and going through and finishing the project, and then doing the whole rewrite process and getting it ready for publication. There's a lot of work and a lot of steps that go into it. But I've done it before, and not incapable of doing it. So it's just kind of the inspiration I needed, the kick in the pants to say, okay, the time I'm spending working, teaching, the time I'm spending creating YouTube videos, the time I'm spending helping my family, I need to take a little bit of time and actually work on my own craft, on my own writing as well, and get things finished and get them out there. I've got so much half-finished work. I'm sure some of you guys have done this too, where you sat down to write a novel, got 10,000, 20,000 words into it, or sat down even to write a short story and got 500 words into it and realized you didn't know where you were going, or you just kind of fell out of the rhythm. You didn't write for a week and then you forgot where you were going with the story and you never finished it. We need to get in the habit of finishing things. All of us do. It's an absolutely crucial skill to be a writer. And finally, kind of going counter to that and the need to make time, sometimes pull time away from the other things that I have going on in my life to make time to write, there's this. It starts with this. Put your desk in the corner, and every time you sit down there to write, remind yourself why it isn't in the middle of the room. Life isn't a support system for art. It's the other way around. So even if you're not making money on your art, even if you're not making a living as a writer, you still want to write, you still feel that need, that drive to create, and maybe your goal is to get published someday. Still, remember, even if it's not to get published someday, even if it's just you're writing for enlightenment, you're writing for self-fulfillment, that's still only there to support your life. It's to help you to contextualize or to understand or to deal with everything else that's going on in your life. It's not there to center your life around, because that is the great way to drive people away. And you drive people away and you're so narrow focused on your writing, you kind of lose all the material in the world around you that could actually feed in to help you be creative with your writing. You end up tying yourself into a narrow space and you actually kill your creativity instead of helping it. Make sure that while you're doing your work, you keep your priorities in order. So what inspires your writing? What do you need to keep in mind to get yourself going, to get yourself to finish? What readings or pieces of advice have you heard that have really resonated with you and have kicked you into gear and gotten you productive? I would love to hear some of your takeaways because I always need more inspiration, guys. So please post that in the comments below. Writing is 95% perspiration, 5% inspiration. You need to do the work. But if you don't get inspired, it's easy to get discouraged, and it can be very hard. It can be even harder to do the work, to get down your nose down to the grind, if you just never, ever feel any kind of pull from it, any kind of inspiration. If you're constantly having to push yourself to do it, if it's always a willpower struggle, you're not gonna last. You need to find ways to get inspired, to keep yourself moving when the craft gets hard. It's gonna get hard. But you know what? The light at the end of the tunnel is worth it. Thanks for joining me, guys. I appreciate it. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, all that good stuff. And I will see you next time. Until then, good luck and good writing. Peace.